The night my parents showed up soaking wet on my porch, I already knew whose hands had pushed them out into the rain. I remember standing at the door, watching my mother try to hold her sari together against the wind. My father, a man who once ran 3 textile shops and never asked anyone for a single thing, was gripping the porch railing like it was the only solid thing left in his world. They hadn't called. They couldn't. My mother's phone had been left inside the house that was no longer theirs. I said nothing for a moment. I just looked at them. My name is Rena, and I have been waiting for something like this. Not hoping for it. Never that. But some quiet part of me had always known my brother Samir's choices would eventually spill onto the rest of us. I stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come inside," I said. "Don't talk yet. Just come inside." My mother started to cry before she even crossed the threshold. My father didn't. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since I was a child, the look of someone who has run completely out of road. I made tea. I got them dry clothes. And while they sat at my kitchen table, still shaking, I listened to everything. By the time they finished, the tea had gone cold, and so had I. What they told me took less than 20 minutes to say, and would take much longer to undo. Samir had gotten married 8 months ago. Not the wedding our parents had planned for years, a quiet registration, followed by a woman named Divya moving into the family home before anyone had been properly introduced. My parents had tried to adjust. That was the word my mother used. Adjust. As if it were a minor inconvenience, like a squeaky door or a leaking tap. Divya had her own ideas about how the house should run. Small things at first. The kitchen reorganized. My mother's prayer corner moved to a back room. My father's chair, the old recliner he'd had for 15 years, replaced without discussion. My parents adjusted. Then Samir started coming home later. Then not at all some nights. My mother noticed the perfume that wasn't Divya's on his shirts. She said nothing to him. She told my father. My father confronted Samir quietly, privately, the way he did everything. That was 3 weeks ago. After that conversation, things moved fast. Divya's mother arrived from Pune. Suddenly there were discussions about space, about the house being too crowded, about elderly people needing proper care facilities. My parents were removed from the home my father had built, brick by brick, loan by loan, while Samir stood in the doorway and watched. He didn't even carry their bags to the car. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was upset, though I was, but because my mind doesn't go quiet when it's hurt. It goes sharp. I lay in bed listening to my parents breathe in the guest room down the hall, and I started making a list. Not on paper. In my head, the way I've always done it. What Samir had. What Samir owed. What could be moved, transferred, contested, or simply taken back. I'm an accounts manager at a mid-sized logistics firm in Pune. I've spent 11 years reading contracts the way other people read menus, looking for what's missing, not what's there. My father had always said I inherited his eye for detail. He meant it as a compliment. Samir used to say it made me cold. He also meant that as an insult. He was wrong on both counts. I'm not cold. I'm patient. In the morning, I made breakfast. Para the curd, the way my mother used to make it for us when we were children. She ate 3 bites and stopped. My father finished his plate, which told me he was already steadying himself. He was preparing for something. He just didn't know I was too. After breakfast, I asked one question. "Baba, whose name is the house in?" My father looked up from his chai. Something shifted behind his eyes. "Mine," he said. "Still mine." That was all I needed to hear. I called in a personal day and drove to the house alone. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't want witnesses to this part, not yet. I parked 2 streets away and walked, the way I used to as a child coming home from school. The gulmohar tree at the corner was still there. The broken tile on the front step that my father had always meant to fix. Some things don't change even when everything else does. Divya's mother answered the door. A small woman with large opinions, dressed like she was expecting guests. She looked at me the way people look at inconveniences, briefly, dismissively. "Rena," she said. Not a greeting. An identification. "Is Samir home?" I asked. He wasn't. She told me he'd gone to the office. She said it with a particular satisfaction that told me she already considered herself the woman in charge of this house. I smiled and said I'd wait.
She didn't want that.
But the house wasn't hers to refuse me entry to. Not legally, not yet, and some part of her knew it. She let me in. I sat in my father's chair, the new one they'd replaced his recliner with. I looked around the room slowly, cataloging everything. Divya came downstairs 20 minutes later, saw me sitting there, and stopped on the third step. She had that look, the one people get when they realize they miscalculated.
Good.
She should. Because what I'd found in my father's documents that morning changed everything. The document was a general power of attorney. My father had signed it 4 months ago, shortly after Samir's wedding. It gave Samir the authority to manage, lease, or sell the property on my father's behalf. My father had signed it believing it was paperwork related to a bank loan Samir claimed he was arranging for home repairs. There were no repairs. There was no loan. There was, however, a buyer. I found the preliminary sale agreement folded inside an electricity bill envelope at the back of my father's file drawer. The same drawer Samir had apparently searched, but not emptied carefully enough. The property had been valued. A token amount had already exchanged hands. The deal was 30 days from completion. My father didn't know. I sat with that for exactly as long as I needed to, which was about 40 seconds, and then I took photographs of every page with my phone. Samir arrived home at noon. He walked in, saw me, and did something that told me everything about who he had become. He looked relieved before he looked guilty, as if he'd been expecting someone worse. "Reena," he said, "I was going to tell Baba." "When?" I asked. "Before or after the registration?" He started explaining. The business pressure, the debt, the house being too large for just the two of them, how our parents would be comfortable in a smaller place. I let him talk. People always reveal more when they think they're winning. I let 3 days pass before I made my first move. Samir thought my silence was acceptance. That was his first mistake. His second was not knowing that on the morning after I visited the house, I had already placed a call to a property lawyer named Vikram Sood, a man I had handled freight documentation for 2 years ago, who owed me a professional favor and had a reputation for being exceptionally thorough. Vikram confirmed what I suspected within 24 hours. A general power of attorney can be revoked, at any time, by the person who granted it. The revocation simply needs to be notarized and filed before any transaction is completed. Samir's sale was 30 days out. We had time, but not much of it. I explained none of this to my parents yet. My mother would worry loudly. My father would want to confront Samir directly, and a confrontation would alert Samir that the ground was shifting under him. I needed him still, comfortable, unaware. I also made a second call to a contact at the firm where Samir worked, a woman named Priya who had once mentioned, carefully and only once, that Samir's expense reports had a pattern she found difficult to explain. I asked her if she'd be willing to explain it now. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've been waiting for someone to ask." I wrote down everything she told me and closed my notebook. The next step wasn't legal. It was personal. My father signed the revocation on a Tuesday morning at Vikram's office. I had told him everything the night before. All of it, the power of attorney, the sale agreement, the buyer, the token payment. I laid the documents on the kitchen table, and I watched my father read each page slowly, the way he used to read contracts in his shop when I was young. His hands didn't shake. His face didn't change. When he finished, he stacked the papers neatly, aligned the edges, and set them down. He looked at me and said, "How long have you known?"
5 days, I said.
He nodded once. That was all. My mother wept in the other room. We could both hear her. My father and I sat in silence and let her, because some grief needs space, and neither of us had the words for it anyway. The revocation was filed by noon. Vikram contacted the buyer's lawyer the same afternoon, professionally, cleanly, informing them that the authorizing document had been legally withdrawn and the proposed transaction had no valid foundation. The buyer walked away within 48 hours. These things move fast when the legal ground disappears. Samir called me that evening. I let it ring. He called 4 more times. I let those ring too. On the 5th call I picked up and said nothing. Just waited. You have no idea what you've just done, he said. I almost smiled. He had no idea what was still coming. Samir came to my apartment 2 days later. He didn't knock, he pounded. I opened the door before he could wake my parents, who were still sleeping. I stepped into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind me. I looked at him the way you look at something you've already decided about. He was different from the brother I remembered. Thinner, sharper around the eyes in the wrong way. He had the expression of a man who had confused cruelty for strategy for so long that he no longer saw the difference. He told me I had destroyed his future, that the debt was real, that I didn't understand pressure, that our parents were old and difficult, and the house was wasted on them. He said Divya's mother had told him to cut contact with me entirely. He said a great many things. I waited until he was finished. Then I told him about Priya, about the expense reports, about the conversation I'd had with his firm's compliance officer, not as a threat, but as information I had already delivered. I told him the house revocation was only the first filing. I told him Vikram was currently preparing a civil fraud case on my father's behalf. I watched the color leave his face. You would do this to your own brother, he said. There it is, the line that cowards use when consequences finally arrive. No, I said quietly. You did this. I'm just the one who showed up. I went back inside and locked the door. My parents were already awake. My father was sitting at the kitchen table with his chai, looking out the window at nothing in particular. My mother was making breakfast like it was any other morning. It wasn't, but we were going to be all right. Some battles don't end with noise. They end with a locked door, a warm kitchen, and the quiet certainty that justice doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply arrives and stays.